Good morning, y'all. Welcome to another live. Checking my sound as per usual. Let's see. I'm about to turn this camera around let me turn down my laptop. Okay. Okay. Give me a minute, turn around this camera. Thought I'd give y'all something to look at besides a blank wall. Okay. Give me a minute to adjust, y'all. I tried to set myself up a little bit better today. How are y'all this morning? Whoops. It's like, don't let it fall, don't let it fall. I'm gonna push my husband's chair out the way. Good morning, y'all. Hope you guys slept well last night. I really enjoyed my morning chill this morning, continuing Second Chronicles. I promise you, this is better than any soap opera, any twisted series on TV. These people are killing me. So I wanted to come on here and do this live with you guys. Is God letting them get away with it? And I want to address the age-old question, where is God when all this evil stuff is happening? You know, how are these people getting in here and causing all of these problems? It seems like God's just letting them get away with it. Is God letting them get away with it? That's what I want to address today in continuing what I've been studying in Second Chronicles. If you haven't watched the lives that I've done before, yesterday I did a live on some of the kings in Second Chronicles that I'm studying right now. And I want to continue a little bit today. But before I go on, I want to encourage you when we do these lives. These are not like prepared lessons. So it's just a raw conversation. So it's possible that, you know, I might have a slip of a tongue, say a wrong name, get a fact mixed up. If that does happen, I do go back and watch these lives and make sure that to the best of my ability, I catch any kind of mistakes like that. So if that does happen, what I do is I go back and I put in the information box any kind of clarification that I need to make. And so I hope you'll go and read those. Even as you're watching the live, if you're not watching it live, you can go and check that information box. Or if something made you scratch your head, come back later and check that information box to see whatever corrections I've made. But I don't have the comments turned on for these lives. My purpose is not to continue a debate or some kind of in-depth conversation or go back and forth with anybody. This is just to encourage you to study the Word of God for yourself and to look this stuff up for yourself. I'm just sharing part of my journey with you guys just to show you how easy it is. You know what I'm saying? And to encourage you to do it for yourself. So I'm not here to, as some super amazing teacher of the gospel, to go back and forth and defend myself about anything. I'm just sharing, openly sharing what I'm getting, you know, as I do my morning chills with God. Okay, and I've already done my morning chill this morning, And so I wanted to come on here and share some of the stuff that I'm processing through, right now. Like, where is God when some of this stuff is going on? And how do these people, quote unquote, get away with it? Okay. So I'm continuing the story of Athaliah, who made herself queen after her son is killed. Okay? And I'm in 2nd Chronicles chapter 24. I want to go back a little bit because I read the chapters after this, but I wanted to go back and give context because I started to talk about this last time, but something escaped my notice. Okay? Chapter 24 verse 7 is what I'm going to read in a minute. Let me find it. Okay. Now, yesterday, when I was telling the story, and this can get a little bit confusing at times, you guys, at least it does for me. Some of these kings have names that sound kind of similar. And there was one time when, the king of the kingdom of Israel had the exact same name as the king of the kingdom of Judah. And going back and forth, you can make a mistake in understanding who they're actually talking about, and it gives a completely different meaning to the story. So be sure you're reading carefully and that you're cross-referencing, because I mentioned in the last live that I noticed that a lot of the same history that was given to us in the books of Kings are being repeated here again, at least mostly the Judah history, because this is for the returning exiles from Judah, this book to help them get themselves together when they return from exile. So the focus is on the kingdom of Judah, but a lot of these stories we read already in 1st and 2nd Kings, and so just be cross-referencing. You know what I'm saying? And also, some of the prophets that God used to talk to these people have their own books that can shed even more insight on the details. But I feel like I have to read kind of carefully, not to kind of get lost with all of the names, and even in how they're pronounced. Okay? And so yesterday we were talking about Ahaziah, and Jehoshaphat, and how, his compromise affected, 2 generations that came after him. And as I continue to read, even beyond that, where his heart was loyal toward God, but he was dibbing and dabbing, the prophet that was sent to him said God wasn't happy with how he loved things that God hated. Okay? And that affected his sons because their hearts they didn't choose for their hearts to be loyal toward God. Instead, they went with the things that he was loving that God hated. That's what they gave their alliance to. And there was idolatry in their lives, and God didn't like that. And so we talked a little bit about Athaliah, who was Ahaziah's mother. When Ahaziah came to the throne after God had judged his father for his wickedness, he didn't learn a lesson from what happened to his father. And part of the reason was because he must have had somewhat of a weak character, because instead of ruling based on his own strength and on his own leading from God and consulting God, he allowed his mother Athaliah to influence him, and she influenced him to be wicked. Okay? And so when he dies, he gets caught up all in the mess of judgment that comes, okay, against the kingdom of Israel. He gets caught up in all that mess, and he himself is killed in the midst of all that mess. Okay? And the verse that I was reading yesterday, that I was referring to when I said what I said yesterday, was in 2nd Chronicles chapter 22, where after Ahaziah dies. And Ahaziah, it has another name in 2nd Chronicles, I think Jehoram or some, I'm not gonna, don't quote me, Joram. He has another name in 2nd Kings, so that could get kind of confusing too. But anyway, it says in verse 9, in verse 9, 2 Chronicles 22, verse 9, it says that he died, and Jehu, who is the one that's executing the judgment, who himself is going to become the next king of Israel, he says, the kingdom of Israel, he says, he buries Ahaziah. And last week we talked about how tragic it was that even though he executed him, he said he buried him honorably, because they said he is the son of Jehoshaphat, the one who compromised, who sought the Lord with all his heart. But this is what happened to your son. And we talked last time about how our sins can affect the next generation, okay? Because there's no guarantee that they're going to follow the good that you knew and believed but didn't completely do. You compromised. You know what I'm saying? And so where I got a little unsure was where the verse that said, so the house of Ahaziah had no one to assume power over the kingdom. And so when I read that, it's easy to assume that that means that he didn't have any sons. He died without an heir. And so that's why there was no one to assume power over the kingdom. But this is something that I've noticed when I'm studying scripture. Okay? And then after that, it continues to talk about how Athaliah comes in. He kills all the royal heirs. Well, who are the royal heirs? In the verse before that, it just said that there was no one to assume the throne. So how you read it matters. Okay? So what clarification I feel like I got from the Holy Spirit today is, they were explaining a series of events in the previous verses, and they ended with the ultimate end of the situation for Ahaziah. The reason why there was no one to assume to take over the kingdom isn't because he didn't have any sons. Is because when his mother found out that he was dead, she went in and she killed all the royal heirs. She killed all of his sons except for one son, okay, who was a baby at the time. And the reason why he couldn't kill this son is because his aunt took him. She's married to the high priest Jehoiada, okay, hope I'm pronouncing that right. She took him and she hid him in the temple, which her husband has rule over as the high priest, okay? And so she doesn't kill him because she's not able to find him, okay? And so sometimes when you're reading this, you might say, well, why didn't she, didn't she know about that son? Because it says that there was no one to take over the throne, so she took the throne, okay? But it's not because she didn't know about that son. I mean, how would she not know about her son's youngest son? You know what I'm saying? Or how would she not know about her son's baby? Some things are not said explicitly, but they're kind of implied. It's not that she didn't know that he wasn't there when she killed the other sons. We can understand that she couldn't find him. There was nothing she could do about it, but he also wasn't in the way and no one could find him. So she legitimately could rule because no one could stop her. Okay, so she takes the throne, and how could God let this happen is a question that people might have. This woman is so wicked. How is she getting away with coming in? And if you think about it, she was his mother. So if you think about it, this woman is legitimately coming in and executing her grandsons. She executed her grandsons. Okay. So she kills all his sons, and then she establishes herself on the throne. Okay. And yesterday we got into what happens to her, but this is something that we get a little bit more clarification on. What I'm about to talk about today, we get a little bit more clarification on what she kind of did. Because what ends up happening is that Joash is hidden in the temple for 7 years. Okay? So they hide him for 7 years, which means she's in control. She rules as queen for 7 years. Okay? So what was her rule like? And so today, you know, when I was reading about how they brought Joash, how she was overthrown, and how Joash became king, we find out that one of the most important things he does during his reign is he repairs the temple. Okay? Why does the temple need to be repaired? Well, it needs to be repaired because of something that happened during Athaliah's reign. Okay? The temple needs such extensive repair that they have to raise some kind of they have to do some kind of big fundraising and get the money from the people according to the system, a similar plan that Moses used in the wilderness to raise money for the temple when they needed funds for the tabernacle, not the temple, when they needed funds for the tabernacle in the wilderness. It was a free will offering. Okay, so it wasn't kind of like a tax that was imposed on them that they were forced to pay. It was a free will offering that they had to collect. Okay, and so while I was reading about Joash, who becomes king at the age of 7, he's probably a little bit older when he's trying to repair the temple. He is, the way he's giving orders, I'm thinking he's much older. But, you know, I asked myself, what in the world happened to the temple? I don't remember any wars or anything. What in the world happened to the temple that they had to go so far as to raise funds from the people to repair the temple? And then that's when I read 2 Chronicles 24:7. Okay. And it says, for the sons of Athaliah, okay, so these are the dead king's brothers, I'm assuming, because she's his mother. For the sons of Athaliah, that wicked, so we're going back to Joash's father. See how this stuff can get confusing? See how this stuff can get confusing? We're looking at the reign of Athaliah, who usurped the throne, who usurped the true heir to the throne. We're looking at what she did when she reigned, okay? It says, for the sons of Athaliah, that wicked woman, she's remembered, she's not even remembering as the queen, but she's remembered as that wicked woman, had broken into the house of God and had also presented all the dedicated things of the house of the Lord to the Baals. Okay, so I sat there. So this is why they were repairing the temple. She broke into the temple by force. Okay, so we've been studying the temple and how it was set up and how God had given David a plan for how to set up even guards. The temple had gates, and we had read that he set up guards for security in the temple. Okay, this wasn't a place, and we know from studying, you know, how the tabernacle was set up, and the temple is kind of modeled after the tabernacle of God in the wilderness, okay, where they did their sacrifices in the wilderness. You know, we know that there are certain restrictions, you know, for the different areas of the temple and what happened in the temple and who could go into what area. And so when they built Solomon's temple, they even had a Levitical guard set up, okay, and the temple has gates, okay, and so apparently, and they did this so that they could maintain order, so that, you know, when the people came and brought their sacrifices and stuff, there was certain areas that they could be in, and certain areas they shouldn't be in. So the guards kind of brought order. So the way this reads, it sounds like Athaliah broke into the temple, okay? And so was some kind of damage done to the gates? Was some kind of damage done to things that are in the temple? Because clearly there was a fight when she came in, you know, because the priest, even though she was queen, the priest, wouldn't just let her in to do whatever she wants to do. But it says her sons, not her. Were they following her orders? Did she just allow it to happen? It sounds like she was, she either sent them or she was in agreement with what they did, because the credit of the whole thing is given to her. Okay. So they came in, and there was some kind of a fight that caused some kind of disrepair to the temple somehow. And they took all the sacred things, the dedicated things of the house of the Lord. Now, I don't know what these dedicated things were. Okay? I'm not sure. We know that we could probably find out what things were considered dedicated in the temple if we look at the different things that were described in the tabernacle. I don't know. How far could she have gotten? Okay. Did she come in and steal some of the gold bowls? Did she take laver? Like, what did she take? You know what I'm saying? We only know that they're dedicated things. How far did she go in? I began to wonder, okay, so did God allow her to go all the way in? Did she go all the way into the Holy of Holies? Is that even possible? Because we know that, only, there are several areas. There's the outer court where the sacrifices are being burnt and killed and offered and all of that. And the big, the sea, the big sea, and the laver where the priests wash everything and the people can come and offer their stuff. And then there's the holy place that has the lampstand and the table of showbread. You know what I'm saying? And the altar of incense. But only certain priests could go into that area. Only the priests could go into that area. Like a regular person, can go into the holy place. And there's a curtain that separates that, it's enclosed and it's separated by a curtain. You couldn't even look into the holy place. Only the priests were able to do that. Okay. And then beyond that, what is the Holy of Holies, where the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, with the mercy seat is. You know what I'm saying? And that place, even the regular priest couldn't go in. Only the high priest could go in once a day on pain of death. Okay? On pain of death. So I'm like, it doesn't say they came in and took the ark. So I don't know how far they got in. So I'm thinking perhaps the sacred things that they took, they didn't get in as far as the holy place, and definitely not the Holy of Holies. Maybe that wasn't their purpose, but I just wonder what they took. Okay. But more important and why they didn't just drop dead. Okay. Because we know that if, people that went into the Holy of Holies, even the high priest, when he went in once a year, he wore bells that they could hear ringing as he moved around and did what he had to do. And, so that they could know that what he was doing was being accepted by God, and that he wasn't unworthy to be in the place because he could just drop dead if God wasn't pleased. You know what I'm saying? And so it kind of makes you feel like God's holiness, is in that place, and he's upholding that place. So how in the world could this woman break in, okay, and take these dedicated items? Why? How could God let that happen? Okay? You start to ask yourself that, okay? And then she takes the dedicated items, okay? Or her sons take it, okay? But it kind of reads like, well, she's queen, and it's happening under her watch. Either she sent them or she allowed it. So it's really, the responsibility is hers, right? And so her sons take it and bring it to the temple of Baal. So we get more information about Athaliah, that as queen of the kingdom of Judah, who's supposed to be submitted to God, she's openly worshiping Baal. And there's a temple of Baal that she's affiliated to. And she's bringing the dedicated things from the temple of God to Baal's temple And so now we see that this is not a contest between, you know, even the Levites who guard the temple and her sons, or her and the people of Israel. This is a contest between her God, the Baals, and God. Look, I broke into your house. It's interesting because in Chronicles and Kings and all of those, they don't call it the temple. They don't call Solomon's um, temple the temple. They always call it the house of the Lord, which kind of makes it really, really, really real for you when you think about it as the house of the Lord. You know, so it's almost like she's saying, my God is stronger than God. My God is stronger than the God Israel has been worshiping. That's why I'm worshiping him instead of God. Look, I was able to go all the way in his house and take the dedicated things which only authorized people can handle for the purpose of worshiping God. I went in and I took it, and he did nothing to stop me. He let me get away with it. Okay? So her conclusion was, my God is stronger than the God of Israel. That was her conclusion. And the reason why I'm bringing up this story, and the reason why I even wanted to have this conversation in the first place, is because look at our world that we're living in right now. Okay? It looks like people are getting away with crazy stuff. And as humans, since we don't see the whole picture and we don't understand what's going on, and you know, those of us who believe in God believe that he's in control, nothing happens outside of his control. So it can seem like he's letting stuff happen and he's letting these people get away with it. Why are they getting away with it? How are they getting away with it? Okay? What I'm beginning to realize is that it ain't over until it's over. You know what I'm saying? It ain't over until it's over. And what do you mean by getting away with it? Because when we look at the stories of these people and their histories, they're not getting away with it. And it seems to me that the way we look at the time frame that justice has to be met is very different from how God looks at time. He's literally sitting outside of time. You know what I'm saying? He's sitting outside of time. Okay? So, but we're in time and we're bound by time. So our perception of time is very different from God. And so he sees time and he sees meting out justice over generations, whereas we see, well, the wrong happened in this generation. It happened in this season. It needs to be dealt with in this season. Okay? But in studying these people, I see that their actions affect them in their season, and sometimes completely in their season, but sometimes I see it partially in their season. But often I see that their actions have overarching long consequences, okay, beyond their generation, beyond their season. So does this mean, well, that guy died, he didn't even see God respond? Does that mean he got away with it and God didn't respond, and so it wasn't good enough, it didn't matter? What I'm starting to realize is, you know, because we're in time and because we're only limited in seeing what we're experiencing personally, we think that's all it is and that's all we need to worry about. Okay? But we need to begin to see ourselves as supernatural beings that exist eternally. And so if you exist eternally, you know, God can deal with you in your moment, or he can deal with you in the next generation because you're still here. You know, and your legacy matters. Okay? But as far as Athaliah was concerned, he did deal with her right then and there, and she didn't get away with it. She only reigned for 7 years. And so her action of taking the dedicated things, I feel, caused Jehoiada, the high priest. It doesn't say this in the passage, but as I was thinking about it, and I was as I was reflecting on it, you know, they did what they did. Athaliah's sons, with Athaliah fully, clearly being in support of it, taking the dedicated things and bringing it to the temple of Baal to prove that, you know, their Baal was stronger than God, and that they were justified in worshiping God. And maybe even to make a case to the children of Israel, look what God let happen. Okay, you need to stop worshiping your weak God and come worship the Baals who are stronger. Because look, his dedicated things are in the temple of Baal. Who knows if that was the reason why she was doing it, to establish her kingdom, to get the people to follow her wholeheartedly. Who knows if that's why she was doing what she was doing. You know, so they thought they were set. But instead, you know, since there was a righteous high priest in the temple of God, we know Jehoiada to be a righteous high priest. You know, since there was a righteous high priest in the temple of God, you know, it had the opposite effect on him. The fact that they took the sacred things, you know, it doesn't say it explicitly here, but I think it emboldened him to do what he then did, because he devises a plan to overthrow Athaliah. She might not know where the true heir to the throne is, but he does, you know, because his wife has brought, you know, the true heir, Joash, to him and hidden him in the temple all these years. And in the last live, we talked about how, you know, in order to break the pattern of compromise and the sin that was in that bloodline, you know, God literally took a baby out of that environment, out of that compromised environment, and had him living in the temple under a righteous high priest, so that when it's his turn to rule, he could at least start off right. You know what I'm saying? And so he's only 7 when Jehoiada is like, okay, Athaliah has to go. We have to get rid of Athaliah. And I think it's partly because of, you know, how out of hand she had gotten in her open worship of the Baals. You know, it's one thing to have a king who compromises and still upholds the plan of worship that God gave Israel, and another thing to have a ruler who's openly saying, I don't serve your God at all. He's weaker than my God. My God is superior, which is basically what Athaliah is saying when she takes the dedicated things from the house of the Lord and brings it to the temple of her Baal. Okay. And so it's interesting when we read how God handles her. Did she get away with it? You know, she's thinking she's king of the world, you know. Did she get away with it though? Okay, so let's look at 2 Chronicles 23 to see what happens to her. Okay, so in the 7th year, this is of Joash, the heir to the throne, being hidden in the temple, Jehoiada strengthened himself. Okay, meaning he made up his mind that that's it. Athaliah's got to go. Okay, and made a covenant with the captains of hundreds. Okay, and so then it talks about the Levitical system that they have set up, okay, in the temple to do what needs to be done, including, we get into the guard a little bit, so don't worry about all these names, but I'm going to just read it for the sake of the continuity of the story, okay? So he made a covenant with the captains of hundreds, Azariah, the son of Jeroham, Ishmael, the son of Jehohanan, Azariah, the son of Obed, Messiah, the son of Adiah, and Elishaphat, the son of Zikri. And they went throughout Judah and gathered the Levites from all the cities of Judah and the chief fathers of Israel, and they came to Jerusalem. Then all the assembly made a covenant with the king in the house of God. So, dude is, you know, a child hidden in the temple. But as far as everybody's concerned, he's the king. He hasn't even been openly crowned yet. Athaliah doesn't know where he is. She has made herself queen, but is queen in her own mind. As far as God is concerned, Joash is already king. Okay. So the wicked can implement things, institute things, set themselves up, put things in place, but God has the last word, and he upholds the truth of the situation, not the truth, the lie that we've twisted into our truth, if that makes any sense. Okay? So in verse 3 it says, "Then all the assembly made a covenant with the king in the house of God, and he said to them, Behold, the king's son shall reign. As the Lord had said of the sons of David, this is what you shall do." So now he comes up with a plan to put Joash on the throne. "1/3 of you entering on the Sabbath of the priests of the Levites shall be keeping watch over the doors. 1/3 shall be at the king's house, and 1/3 at the gate of the foundation. All the people shall be in the courts of the house of the Lord. But let no one come into the house of the Lord except the priests and those of the Levites who serve. They may go in, for they are holy. But all the people shall keep the watch of the Lord. And the Levites shall surround the king on all sides, every man with his weapon in his hand. And whoever comes into the house, let him be put to death." Okay? So when you think about the Levitical priesthood, don't think about priesthoods we have of our day or monks we have of our day, who, are pacifists, who don't really fight. You know what I'm saying? The Levitical priesthood was armed, trained, and ready to fight. Okay? God didn't forbid them from fighting. There were priests whose work was dedicated to the temple, but all of them could fight and did fight when it was necessary. In fact, when they went into battle, when they used to go into battle with the Ark of the Covenant, only a priest could carry it and not die. And a specific priest from a specific line could carry it. You know what I'm saying? And so these people were armed and ready to fight and defend the king. So they understood that Athaliah might retaliate and try to stop it or try to attack him. And they were ready to deal with that. So think about that when you think about yourself as a believer and how God might lead you to stand. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes there's a time to stand and make that kind of a stand. And I think it would be an error to think that holiness means that when God calls you to stand and fight, it's somehow unholy or ungodly to take up your weapon and do what you have to do. Now, I'm not justifying, some kind of crazy nonsense based on things that are going in the world right now. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about what I'm reading about right here. When I think about a priesthood, I would not think of somebody being armed and ready to fight. But just be aware that this is the situation that we're describing right here. And they saw there was nothing wrong with it. They had wives too. You know what I'm saying? There was nothing wrong with it. So very different from how we see priesthoods and monks and things like that played out today. Okay? Okay, so it says, "And the Levites surrounded the king on all sides, every man with his weapon in his hands. And whoever comes into the house, let him be put to death. You are to be with the king when he comes in and when he goes out." So the Levites and all Judah did according to all that Jehoiada the priest commanded. Okay? And so it says, "And each man took his men who were to be on duty on the Sabbath, with those who were going off duty on the Sabbath, for Jehoiada the priest had not dismissed the divisions." So, we read about the divisions that David had set up for how, the security is supposed to happen and how they had shifts and how they switched. He's saying he kept all hands on deck. So he didn't dismiss the division that was there before to implement this plan to crown Joash. Okay? "And Jehoiada the priest gave the captain of hundreds the spears and the large and small shields which had belonged to King David that were in the temple of God." So in the temple of God, there were these storage rooms where they stored things like this. And so he had access to the things that David used. Okay? David's spears and David's shield. Okay, making me think of the covenant God had with David and why this has to succeed. Okay? 10. Then he set all the people, every man with his weapon in his hand, from the right side of the temple to the left side of the temple, along by the altar and by the temple, all around the king. And they brought out the king's son, put the crown on him, gave him the testimony, which is the law, okay, and made him king. Then Jehoiada and his sons anointed him and said, "Long live the king." Okay, in front of all the people. Now Athaliah doesn't even know that this Queen Athaliah doesn't even know that this is going on. But does she get away with what she did by taking allowing her sons to take the sacred things out of the temple and bringing it to the temple of her Baal? Let's see what happens to her. Now when Athaliah heard the noise of the people running and praising the king, she came to the people in the temple of the Lord. When she looked, there was the king standing by his pillar at the entrance, and the leaders and the trumpeters were by the king. All the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets. It's like, Athaliah, you're completely irrelevant right now. Okay? Your Baal that you said was stronger than God is being shown to be completely irrelevant right now. Where was your Baal when they were taking your throne away from you? Where was your Baal when they were crowning Joash? Why didn't your Baal make fire come out of heaven and stop Joash? Okay, so you went and you took the sacred things and brought them into the temple thinking that was something big. Okay, but God is right now taking away your throne that you think was yours, that isn't actually yours. Your attempt to establish your kingdom has been completely overthrown. Nobody even told you that this was going on. You're even walking around free. Nobody even tried to go in your room and tie you up so that this could go on. That's how powerless you really are. You know, to me, that's the message that God is sending through this situation. Because she doesn't even know what is going on until she hears everybody worshiping and praising. Everybody's rejoicing and blowing trumpets. Also the singers with musical instruments and those who led in praise. Okay. And the only thing Athaliah could do, okay, it says so Athaliah tore her clothes. You a woman. I mean, I couldn't even imagine what that looks like. Have you ever seen those biblical movies where the man just rips his, culturally, when you rip your garments, that's supposed to symbolize an ultimate show of anger and indignation and frustration against something. It shows grief and strong feeling against something. And as a woman, in that modest culture, she tore her clothes. That's how upset she was. She ripped her robes. And she says, treason, treason. It's just like, that's the end of what you can do. You thought you were so powerful that you broke into the house of the Lord and even got away with taking the sacred things and bringing it to your bowels. And now somebody else is standing where the king should be. And you're supposed to be queen, and all you can do is rip your clothes and yell treason. Okay? Now we see who's really in charge of the situation, because in verse 14 it's not her, even though she's queen. In verse 14 it says, and Jehoiada the priest brought out the captains of hundreds who were set over the army and said to them, take her outside under guard and slay with the sword whoever follows her. For the priest had said, do not kill her in the house of the Lord. This is hilarious to me. Okay, we need to execute her, but we don't want to get the carpets dirty. I'm joking, you guys. You know what I'm saying? Don't execute her here, because her blood, we don't want her blood, her nasty blood up in here. This is a holy place. We're not going to kill her in here, you know, meaning, and this was hilarious to me, because the house of the Lord, the outer court, the temple, you know, is a place where they sacrifice animals all the time. Okay. And there's always blood. You know what I'm saying? But it's like, it's almost like they're saying the blood of these animals is more holy and sacred than your blood. Your blood, you're so bad, you're so wicked, your blood shouldn't even be in this holy place. Okay? Even the animals, even that goat over here, we could slaughter that goat here and it would be all right, but we can't deal with you up in here. Okay? We got to take you out and execute you. Okay? So it says that in verse 15, so they seized her, and she went by way of the entrance of the horse gate into the king's house, and they killed her there. Okay? So they couldn't kill her in the temple. They could kill her in the king's house. They killed her in her house. You know what I'm saying? The sin was already in there anyway. So they kill her in her house and they execute her there. Okay? That's how much she got away with it. That's how much she wasn't in control when she thought she was in control. That's how much all the glory she had surrounded herself with amounted to. That's how much the little g gods that she had given her confidence to were defeated by the true God. And we see this theme over and over and over and over in the Bible, in the different stories that we read. God is in control. Nobody's getting away with anything. God is implementing his plan. His perception of time is the real perception of time. Okay? And when we judge things based on our limited knowledge, our limited vision, our limited ability to understand, and we're so myopic in our perception of justice and what needs to happen as it pertains only specifically to us four and no more. You know what I'm saying? We miss it. We don't see the whole picture. We don't see the big picture. But God is always cognizant, aware of the big picture. And he's always implementing justice and truth no matter what. You know, and I'm learning that it would be better for me to ask God to help me to understand justice. When I'm asking for justice, I'm not asking, Lord, you know, we need justice in this situation. Please do A, B, and C. I'm getting to the point now, you guys, where I'm starting to realize I need to ask God, what is justice in this situation? Okay? And help me to pray according to what true justice actually is. Because you are justice. You know, instead of having some measure of justice and trying to hold God accountable to it, realizing that there is no justice outside of God, he is the measure of justice. He is the measuring line that we put things up against. You know, we don't challenge what he says is justice based on our flawed, weak, inadequate human justice, because that's not true justice. You know, it's interesting because when Jesus stood, in judgment before the religious leaders of Israel, when they wanted to kill him, he said he didn't entrust himself to them. He didn't entrust himself to their justice. He entrusted himself to the one who could truly judge rightly, his Father. And a lot of those people were impassioned in their devotion to God, thinking that they knew everything, thinking that they were right. Imagine standing before God and telling him that, you're right and he's wrong, which is essentially what the Pharisees did to Jesus. It's crazy. It's crazy, but you can be that far gone. And you can deny every evidence that God puts in front of you in your pride in believing that you're right and God is wrong. You know what I'm saying? And in your estimation that he's just letting the evil get away with things, you're right and God is wrong, and be completely wrong. and you know, that just, it just blows my mind. It just blows my mind and encourages me, you know, to lean more deeply into God's faithfulness. And I could go on, you guys, because there was so much more that I read, you know, in my Bible chill, morning chill today. You know, Joash is another example. Can you really get away with it? Because he gets on the throne, and it says that he did what was right in the sight of the Lord as long as Jehoiada the priest was alive. He was a righteous priest. As long as he was able to influence Joash, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Okay? But once Jehoiada dies, he turns away from God. He turns away from God. It says that the leaders of let me read it to you exactly. It says the leaders of Judah came and bowed down to the king, and the king listened to them. And the next thing you read is, therefore they left the house of the Lord, of the God of their fathers, and served wooden images and idols. Okay? And the wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem because of their trespass. And what's really ironic to me, okay, is that right before that, it talks about how Jehoiada the high priest lived until he was 130 years old. Okay? Imagine somebody living to be 130 years old. You know, and they, you know, they talk about this. They take like 2 scriptures to talk about this. Okay? We're talking about God letting the wicked get away with things. But what about how God rewards the faithful, and how God rewards the righteous, and how overarching his blessing is? You know, and I think there's a scripture that says, to 1,000 generations to the ones who serve God. What about that? You know what I'm saying? And Jehoiada is a manifestation of God's goodness toward the righteous, while you're looking at the little bit of, you know, the little bit of really, in comparison, crumbs that the wicked get in the season where it looks like they're prospering, you know, as compared to the blessing that God, you know, pours on the righteous when they serve him. This man lived to be 130 years old. You know what I'm saying? That is a long time by the standards today, and it's a long time in their day. You know what I'm saying? He lived to be 130 years old. And his righteousness had such an impact, okay, that the king, who later we see his heart wasn't completely devoted to God. His heart wasn't completely loyal to God, okay? And it seemed that, you know, Jehoiada's righteousness, the influence that he had on this king, the effect, the impact that he had on this king was such that he caused this king, God used him, and it caused this king to do right in the eyes of the Lord as long as he was alive. Okay? And not only did this man live for 130 years as a righteous high priest, okay, we are told that when he dies, the people bury him like a king in the city of David. They bury him like a king, okay, because of how faithful he was. Okay, it says, because in 2 Chronicles chapter 24 verse 16, this high priest is buried as like a king in the city of David among the kings, because he had done good in Israel, both toward God and his house, toward God and the house of the temple, the house of God. a priest buried like a king. Okay? That's encouraging. That's encouraging. And for me, it's like I need to keep my eyes on that. You know, instead of keeping my eyes on, oh, look at this wicked person prospering. Why isn't God doing anything? Why is God letting him get away with it? You know what I'm saying? Look at how God dealt with this man for his faithfulness and his righteousness. Okay? And then right after that, it talks about how, for what reason, I don't even know. Okay? This just highlights to me, you know, the foolishness of our condition in sin. How much of a slave we are to Satan in our sin when we're, you know, before we come to the Lord, that you would have a righteous high priest like this, that you would have blessings living under God's protection like this. And then the minute this man dies, it's like the wool goes back over your eyes again. And the leaders of Judah come to Joash, and they can't have told him anything godly and biblical. Okay? It doesn't say what their conversation was. But in the next sentence, it says, after they left, you know, they said, Joash listened to them. You know, Jehoiada is buried. Joash listens to these leaders of Judah. And then in the next breath, you know, they went off to worship their idols who could do nothing for them. You know what I'm saying? They went off to worship their idols. And then Joash goes down this slippery slope, completely turning his back on God. And it made God really angry. But God's love and mercy, once again, is displayed because he sends him a prophet to tell him, you're going the wrong way. You're doing the wrong thing. Okay, this is not the way. So the Spirit of God comes upon Jehoiada's son. Okay, he had wholeheartedly followed Jehoiada. Now God's Spirit falls on his son. You would think that Joash would now be able to look at the son and draw encouragement, you know, and direction to be on the right path, looking at the son of the man you had respected so much. You know what I'm saying? But so he sends Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada the high priest, okay, who stood above the people. Why do you transgress the commandments of the Lord so that you cannot prosper? Okay? So even though you know, you think you're getting away with it, you think you're blessed because you've got some stuff. That's not what true prosperity is. It's long lasting. It cannot be taken away from you when God gives it to you as you walk in obedience to him. When you transgress God's commandments, you cannot prosper. That's what this prophet is saying. It says, because you have forsaken the Lord, he has also forsaken you. You walked away from God, he's going to let you walk away. And when you walk away from God, realize you're walking away so you don't have God. You're on your way, you're on your own now. You know what I'm saying? So when they heard this message from God, which is basically, you know, you're going the wrong way, repent, turn around, come back to me. Instead of stopping, turning around and coming back to God, his response is to conspire against Zechariah. They stoned him and they killed him. Okay? And God describes this behavior in verse 22, 2 Chronicles 24, verse 22, as meaning, thus Joash, the king, did not remember the kindness which Jehoiada his father had done to him. You were a baby. Zechariah's father Jehoiada hid you in the temple for 7 years. And on the 7th year, he armed his priests with weapons to bring you out of the temple and crowned you king and stood by you so that you could rule righteously until he died. at the ripe old age of 130. You know what I'm saying? And you repay him by executing his son? It has to be because you don't remember the kindness he did to you. Okay? And so, but killed his son. And as he died, now it's interesting because, you know, as he's stoning Zechariah, as Zechariah is dying, okay, Joash says, the Lord look upon it and repay. It's like he thumbs his hands at God. You know, yeah, I said it. Yeah, I did it. What you gonna do about it? Kind of attitude. You know, is God gonna let him get away with it? God's not gonna let him get away with it, you guys. He doesn't get away with it. You know, in that moment as he's killing Zechariah, lightning doesn't come out of heaven and strike him dead. And he probably goes home and sleeps that night. And God didn't do anything. And so you walk away from that thinking, you know, God is weak and God's not going to do anything. But God is not weak. God does see. And God will do anything. Will do something. He will do it the way he wants to do it, in a way that executes judgment righteously, and he will do it in his time. You know what I'm saying? So let's see what ends up happening to this guy. Let's see what ends up happening to this guy. Okay, just a little while later, in the spring of that year, the army of Syria comes up against Joash. In verse 23, they come all the way to Judah and Jerusalem. They destroy all the leaders of the people. Remember the leaders of Judah that came and led Joash off in the first place? They destroy all of them. Sent all their spoil to the king of Damascus. They only show up with a small company. Okay? They only show up with a small company of men. But the Lord delivered what at that time for Israel was a very great army into their hand, because they had forsaken the Lord God of their fathers. Okay? And so this is the judgment that was executed against Joash. These people gave him the ultimate beat down and tore him up and left him severely wounded. Okay? And he was in his bed recovering. And to me, this is the ultimate shame that happens to this man. The enemy doesn't even completely finish him off on the battlefield. He's home where he should have been safe with his people, with his servants, okay? Trying to recuperate from this horrible wound. He can't even die in peace. You know what I'm saying? He can't even enjoy a good hospice situation, okay? While he is in his bed resting, it says that his own servants, okay? Let's look at it in verse 25, okay? 2 Chronicles 24, you know, I'm going to start a little bit, I'm going to start from verse 24 and read it to give you the full context. It says, for the army of the Syrians came with a small company of men, but the Lord delivered a very great army into their hand, because they had forsaken the Lord God of their fathers. So they executed judgment against Joash. This means that God used the army of Syria. This situation with the army of Syria was God's way of executing judgment against Joash. You know when Joash said, the Lord look on it and repay, when he executed Zechariah. This is the judgment that's coming on you for this. Okay? It says in verse 25, and when they had withdrawn from him, for they left him severely wounded, his own servants conspired against him because of the blood of the son of Jehoiada, the priest, that's Zechariah, and killed him on his bed. So he died. You can't even say, I died on the battlefield with honor. I'm a king. We fight wars. We died that way. You know, there's nothing dishonorable about that. But you get severely wounded. You're home. And your own servants that are supposed to be loyal to you kill you. You get killed by a servant, not even a man of war. You get killed by your own servant. Did he get away with it? Did he get away with it? Isn't this fun, you guys? He didn't get away with it. He didn't get away with it. That's not getting away with it. That's not getting away with it. Okay? Something is, if in eternity, you're still getting away with it. Through the generations, you're still getting away with it. When you pit yourself against God, you have to flow the way he flows. You know what I'm saying? You have to flow the way he flows. You have to pit up the strength of what you did based on his true strength. You know, he always was and he always will be. You know what I'm saying? You had a beginning, but you're eternal from now on. You know, in the end, when you face off with God in your evil, can you meet him blow for blow? At one point, you going down. You are going down. You know, isn't this fun? I love delving into these stories like this, y'all. There's just so much richness, you know, in this. There's just so much richness. It's fun. It's fun. This is what my study time looks like. Okay? This is why I do this. I'm looking at these comments. Okay. So apparently there was a little bit of technical difficulties. I'm reading these comments from RS Beetle RS. Apparently at some point the camera was off, but that you could hear audio, but the image was frozen. I'm sorry for that. I have no idea. I was all up in it. Didn't even notice that. But hopefully if you guys had audio, that's the most important thing. Okay? That's the most important thing. I'm looking at these comments. Okay, turning off my volume. But anyway, I would just really encourage you guys. I don't see any other comments. But I would really encourage you guys to get into this word. It's so good. It's so good. But that's all I have for you today. Have a blessed day. Be blessed.